alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm your host, Tim Niederreiter, and with me today is a new guest to the show, Meg Hafdahl. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's great to have you. Tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and the sort of stuff you write.
Yeah, so I'm a horror writer. I co-author a series of books called the Science of series. Our latest book is The Science of Serial Killers. And then I also write fiction. So I have 3 horror novels out as well as 3 short story collections out. So I write a lot. I write audio plays, but everything is connected back to my love of horror.
Ah, yes. And is it specifically serial killers or is it more general than that?
Oh no. So this nonfiction series that I write, we started with The Science of Monsters. And then we did Science of Women in Horror, which was a Bram Stoker nominated book. And then we did Science of Stephen King. And then we did Serial Killers. And our next book that comes out in October in that series is Science of Witchcraft, which was really fun. And
those all sound fascinating.
Yeah, they're really fun. They're all nonfiction. So we, for Stephen King, for example, we, break down the books and we talk about science and history and references he makes and stuff like that. And then Serial Killers, we talk about, films. For instance, like Rope, the Alfred Hitchcock movie. I talk about, the real murder that, inspired that. And so I love kind of having that nonfiction vibe, but then I also like to, write my horror fiction as well. So I'm kind of all over the place, as long as it's horror.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's great. It's actually kind of reminds me of me. I mean, a little bit in that, except for me, it's fantasy and science fiction, basically
Sure.
the speculative fiction genres.
Yeah.
Though I guess horror does tend to get lumped into speculative fiction. I consider horror to be a little more like romance in that it can be, but it isn't necessarily speculative.
Yeah, I agree. I guess it kind of depends. You kind of know when it feels speculative and when it doesn't.
Right, like Silence of the Lambs, I wouldn't say is speculative fiction, for example.
No, exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, so you've got, but when you approach these, I'm very fascinated by the idea of these nonfiction books. So I'm sorry if I go off on this for a second.
No.
Because normally I don't find such a tasty bit of nonfiction from my guests. Honestly, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Especially the Science of Monsters. Actually, that's really got me thinking because I do love a good monster.
Of course,
from giant monsters to the small kinds, it's all I love them all. They're great. The humanoid, non-humanoid, whatever. What's that book like? I know that sounds like it was probably a while ago, but hey.
Yeah, well, you know what? We kind of just break down monsters in the sense of, like, for instance, we have like a whole section called In the Deep, and we talk about Jaws and the creature from the Black Lagoon. We talk about werewolves, we talk about vampires, but we do it all from the aspect of we love horror films, but we also love learning about history. And when I use the word science, it's such a broad term because sometimes we're in feminist studies, sometimes we're in sociology, sometimes we're in psychology, sometimes we're in chemistry. But we're learning and kind of understanding some of these things to make it kind of more fun. Like I did a whole bunch of research on arachnophobia because we were talking about, scary spiders in movies. And I got to learn like so much. And oh my gosh, rabies and Cujo and just all sorts of different things. So it's kind of a fun approach to, we've all kind of talked about these movies a million times, but my co-author and I wanted to like approach them in kind of a different way.
Okay. No, that sounds fascinating. I'm gonna have to check that out. But anyway, it does remind me though, because the monster thing. When you say like the way the monster arises seems to be part of this concept, right? Or the way the characters come to be part of the media.
Exactly.
And that's really interesting. But it also reminds me of the story of a former guest of this podcast who hasn't been on in, I guess, probably years at this point. I keep forgetting to ask him back. But big, and he's one of my idols. So I'm respectful. I keep a respectful distance. Stephen Brust is a Minnesota author, fantasy author, but he supposedly I'm not sure if this is apocryphal or not. I should have asked him, but but supposedly he started his main series, which is about a fantasy assassin, because he had a friend killed by an assassin in real life. Oh, wow. Which is weird to me, and always struck me as strange. Like somebody he knew was assassinated, and so he made this, and he's like, what would that be? What would it be like to be the guy who does that? And that's kind of an interesting concept to me, because it's almost the opposite of the monster in some ways. It's like, okay, you take this horrible thing, and then see how would you make that a human? How because that was a human.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, not to get too deep into it, but I think like horror, a lot of ways, it's kind of like our way of dealing with like real life horrors. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of I'm hoping maybe that was a cathartic experience for him. And it was like, I mean, even though that wasn't horror, but it's something horrible that happened. And maybe by doing that, he kind of like processed, his friend's death, because that's terrible.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, he wrote, I think it's been 16 or 17 books in that series now, so that's this is his longest running stuff.
Yeah. For him, that was a good idea.
Yeah, apparently. But anyway, so your fiction, though, what's sort of, I mean, you write horror, obviously, but is it as wide, is it more focused than your nonfiction, or is it, or I mean, your nonfiction sounds focused, but, it's kind of you're surveying, you're doing different kinds of horror,
Right. Well, yeah. I've been asked the question many times, like, are you more a Poe person or more of a Lovecraft person, like writing wise? And I always say, well, I'm probably more on the Poe scale. But my short stories, so I have 3 short story collections called Twisted Reveries. The third one just came out recently. And that's where I get to kind of play, because they're all short stories, different characters. Yeah. I really like the short story form, because especially in horror, because I just feel like you can really play and have fun, and you can sometimes have awful characters that you're just looking forward to, ripping apart. So I go supernatural, I go not supernatural. I've done both. I like monsters, and I also like, human monsters. And then in my novel series, the first one being Her Dark Inheritance, it all takes place in a little town in Minnesota, a little fictional town. And it kind of starts out feeling like it's not supernatural, but then I bring in the supernatural element. And, I always say my fiction is, female driven. I love to write from, the woman's point of view. And I think horror is sort of uniquely a female genre, really, especially literary horror. So I would say that, if people like female-driven horror suspense, a lot of psychology, but also that supernatural element, then they would like what I do.
Awesome. No, that sounds interesting. And the short stories specifically, I just recently have been writing some short stories, and in my genre. I mean, I did write one horror short story some time ago for an anthology that fell through, unfortunately. But but it was actually okay, because I had such a hard time reading that story. I guess I'm a little squeamish. Let me put it that way, because I like this. I like the idea of the story, but I guess I would. But I'm not real, and I like reading other people's horror. But visceral horror really gets me, and this particular story probably will never see the light of day, because I just couldn't look at it long enough to edit it.
Well, then you know what? Then that's good. That's good. That was cool, though, that you challenged yourself, though, and you went out with your genre.
Exactly. I mean, and at the time, I thought, surely I can write whatever I want, and the truth is, I probably can, but editing it is actually a different story, because I have to read it.
That's true. Good point. That's very good. Yeah, I didn't think of it that way, but that's true.
And I do love editing, but specifically the kind of horror that really, because it was the anthology was supposed to be for phobias or something, like phobias or specific. It really, yeah. And it wasn't my phobia, but I picked something about mine involved a tongue and a surgical operation on a human tongue.
Oh,
It's not very good. It was probably a decent story, but not the kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, maybe there'll be another anthology that it'll fit into someday.
Yeah, maybe. And maybe. Or maybe I'll get somebody else to read it to me and then
there
try
you
not
go.
to pass out. I am very squeamish at times.
Oh, funny. I'm squeamish only in like not with fake stuff. I absolutely love gore and horror movies. But my friend and I were watching that Dr. Pimple Popper show on TLC. You can just stare right at it. And a couple times I had to look away. And she's like, Meg, with the stuff you write, like, you should be able to handle this. I'm like, no, but this is real.
Yeah.
That's scary.
Yeah. It's the idea of, I mean, honestly, the fear that I have, it's almost all internal, right? Like I can do... I mean, I've seen some pretty nasty stuff. I can look at some pretty nasty things and be okay. But it's kind of the opposite. It's like if my imagination makes it worse than it actually is.
Oh, definitely.
And
definitely.
so the unknown is the worst fear, as often is said, I suppose.
For sure.
Yeah. And or just that hint of something horrible.
I know, right? Well, it's kind of like in horror... Sometimes it's just that little thing that's just a little bit off. It's like that person who's like staring at the wall a little bit too long, or that grandma who's just walking a little too fast, or little things like that are really unnerving. That that's something that when I'm writing I try to focus on too. And I write screenplays as well, and it's something visually as well that sometimes it's just that tiny little thing that's off and it unnerves you and then you feel unsettled. And I like creating that space.
Yeah. That's, I'm trying, I've been reading this book, again, in my genre, but it's called, I say it is, but it's kind of borderline because it is, even though it's a war novel, it's a fantasy battle novel, basically. It's all one giant battle. It's called The Heroes by Joe Abercrombie. But it is so dark that it is very, very, at times, hard to read because of how especially when there's actual fighting happening, because it's a 3-day battle and there's a lot of downtime in this book.
Yeah.
Most of it is about just people like trying to get their way through a bog or whatever, cause this is very, there's all these little details in there.
Yes.
And details are just so important in any fiction, but I think it's especially true in horror. Because to convey those elements, if you just slap somebody in the face with it, it's just kind of action, and if you, it's the dread, that's
what I'm always
horror, isn't it?
Going for, because I of course, as I mentioned, I love gore, I love scary moments, all those things, but it's the subtlety that is harder and I think more challenging, at least for me. I'm a huge Shirley Jackson fan, and she lives in that subtle space all the time. And I would love to just, that's something I'm working on all the time, is I just want to live in that subtle space. And, it's kind of fun to slap you in the face sometimes with it. But that's definitely, as a writer, like something I challenge myself to do.
Okay. Yeah. I just the concept of the small, like, okay, there's something, you can't even see it, but there's something just touched your leg or whatever in the dark. That kind of, but on every level, potentially. You could do it in any setting. And that's really, that's a compelling thought, I think. I mean, I really like that idea of, you can just slip that. What is that like? What is it like to be scared? I don't know, in a dining room. I can imagine that.
Yeah, and bright sunshine outside too. It doesn't always have to be dark and spooky. So, I like all that stuff, and I think that's one of the things I like about horror is I think just like why people like yourself like fantasy and stuff, it really stretches your imagination and like the way you look at the world, and like how I don't know, it's like a different perspective, and this idea that this monster could exist or this could exist or that it kind of like forces you to face different things about the world. And I love that. And I like being scared in a safe environment. I don't like roller coasters. Like I don't like rides or things like that. Like that's too real scary, but I love being scared watching a movie,
Oh yeah. I mean, a couple things you said reminded me of one of my favorite horror movies there, which was actually Sunshine. I mean, a lot of my favorite horror movies are science fiction. I mean, there's not a whole lot of fantasy horror going around in film, at least not that I can think of. But there is a fair amount of science fiction stuff, like the Alien films and
sure.
And especially, I mean, I didn't even dislike Alien 3, despite the CGI alien being not very good. I thought Alien 3 was actually a pretty good movie, other than that. I mean, but, I mean, it was kind of a repeat of the first one with a much higher body count, but hey, whatever.
Well, yeah. You know. I mean, that's horror for you sometimes.
Yeah. But there's some things, I mean, there's certain elements of that particular movie, of Alien 3, actually, that reminded me of Warhammer 40,000, which is one of the fandoms I'm a part of, as well.
Oh my gosh. You're going to have to talk to my husband, because he loves Warhammer 40K. Like, that's his thing.
Oh my.
Yeah, you guys are gonna. He's going to the thing in Chicago in a couple weeks. The big Warhammer convention. I don't know if you've heard of.
Oh, is that Adepticon?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I've never been, but
oh,
I'm not really a con guy for the most part. I've gone to some writer conventions, but never a Warhammer convention.
Okay.
But I did grow up with the fandom. I mean, I was a kid reading those old second edition books and stuff. It's crazy.
Oh, cool.
But that setting has some incredibly horrific elements, obviously. There's I can't even begin. So I probably shouldn't have started down that road. But hey, it's another, you know, take everything. It's a kitchen sink setting, so basically everything is in there, but there's so much of it is just, there's a twist on it. I don't know, by the way, it makes it just disgusting and horrific.
Yes. I know. I see my husband makes he makes the models, and he makes and he adds a whole bunch of different stuff, and it's all really gross, and I love it. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I'm actually, this is also my model desk, so I've got models.
Oh, good. So Yeah.
Anyway, I've been, and I do love the customization. I've been doing a lot of that lately.
Yes, that's what he loves to do too. And like I said, I love it because he'll have, you know, these gross pustules.
Oh, okay. So it sounds like your husband's a Nurgle fan.
Yes, I think he does. I don't know
Nurgle,
but I have heard of that one. Yes.
Yes. That was like, it actually takes me back to this dream I had back in college, because I've been collecting the models obviously forever, and my entire life, and I was keeping a dream journal at the time for a Freud unit, right?
Of course.
And in my English degree, and I had this dream, which I tended to do because I've been using the putty and customizing miniatures forever, and I had this dream about a dog that was made out of smaller dogs, but they were all kind of decaying.
Yeah.
And I thought that's the coolest thing ever, but it was a dream of this model being on the table, not of any, and I woke up like, where is that thing? It should be here.
Yeah.
And I can't show it to the audience, and I actually can't show it to you either, because I forget where I put it, but now it's here. It's around here somewhere. And
so
I built it. Yeah, I made it. Yeah. It's not, not quite exactly what I saw in the dream. Huh?
I said, what would Freud say about that?
I don't know. I don't remember a whole lot about Freud. I do remember the dog demon.
You dreamt it, and then you created it. I think that's very inspirational.
It's one of my favorite dream narratives, and I'm glad I have the record of it somewhere. Again, I probably lost it all, but I had to write it down, so I do remember. And that was one of the, but dreams in particular have inspired me a lot. Do you have any kind of inspiration like that? I mean, I hope not for your horror fiction.
Yeah, no, not really. I mean, that's a good question. No, I don't think that I've really connected my dreams to what I create. I mean, it's more daydreams, obviously. I mean, because that's what writers do, right? So it's more along those lines, and sometimes I'll literally be laying in bed about to fall asleep, and I get a great idea or something. But no, thankfully, I think my dreams are not quite that scary, and probably just a lot more random.
Yeah, I mean, my dreams have always been like night terrors, like my entire life.
Oh no!
Yeah, mostly they're pretty bad. But occasionally I get the nice ones. Like what was it? A few days ago, I was like a teacher. I was like a cool teacher at a high school or something, and I was about to retire because I just sold a novel, which was hilarious.
Oh my god, that's the dream!
It was quite a dream.
My high school dreams are like, I can't find my classroom. I have a test and I forgot to study. That's usually my high school dreams.
No, this was where the kids were like, oh, congratulations, sir, you're retiring to go write books, whatever. It was very weird. It was like the end of a school year.
You probably woke up and you're like, oh, that was nice.
It was pretty nice, especially because I was expecting a much worse dream that night for some reason. And that my dreams tend to be quite vivid, even if they're not always they don't always make sense. And maybe that helps with the kind of stuff I write, because I do like making sense of them in some bizarre way. You know, I mean, because I've been known to come up with some weirder settings. Let me put it that way. Some weirder fantasy worlds and stuff.
Yeah.
But I guess one of the things that gets to me is when you write characters in horror, they have to be very relatable, right? I think that's one of the most important elements. Relatable, but lately I've been thinking how much fun I'm having in a book is very dependent on really two things: is how the characters, you know, their actual traits they have, but also their presentation is extremely important. And the fact that if you lay off the gas when you're presenting a character as a person, at any point in a book as an author, I'm like, oh, I'm dead in the water. Like, I can't do this. I can't keep reading. I'm such a picky reader now.
Yeah. Well, I think that's fair because there's so many great books. I mean, it's like if it's not hitting, like there's another book to read, you know. But
absolutely.
For me, I'm a really big believer in complicated characters. Not there's this whole sort of trope or this idea that women are supposed to be kick-ass characters now. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all love Ripley and all that. But I actually prefer to write characters who are more complicated and real. So maybe they have that moment. Maybe they'll have a kick-ass moment. But the truth is, most of us aren't going around like that all day long. You know, we have addictions. We have, problems in relationships. We have, all sorts of traumas that we've lived through, all that stuff. And I like to use that to inform my characters. And then it's so much sweeter when they make that awesome decision and they do kick ass. So for me, it's less about the kick ass woman and more about the complicated female character. That's just my personal thing. Cause, I like reading characters who don't, they're not perfect. They make mistakes and, it makes it more relatable. And yeah, I think in horror, if you want people to care, you have to make good characters. You don't want to see them eaten by the monster,
Even if they have to be. Or eventually, or some of them are going to be, in most cases.
Yeah, definitely.
Or dissolved into goo. And like one of my friends, the author Paul E. Cooley, his Derelict books. Not Derelict. His it was the Black. The Black is like these. This oil rig has drilled down into the depths into the ocean, and they brought something back in the oil. There's something alive in there, and it isn't good. Let me put it that way. The books are pretty good though.
That's what matters.
But and I guess what I'm getting into here was what I'm starting to think more about in general is that delivering a character in particular is maybe the most important thing we do as far as making a book survive contact with the reader. As allowing the book to but there's so much there to like what you said about the female characters, because I've noticed that a lot of especially in movies, especially lately, the women aren't allowed to be complicated, like you were talking about. They're not allowed to be that way. It's like you can't have a character that's written to be strong, but also have weaknesses and foibles.
I was actually.
It's been a problem for a long time, though. Actually, relatively speaking.
It has, and I find it kind of annoying. And I was watching. I was just at the Renegade Film Festival, and Michael Kennedy was there, and he wrote the movie Freaky, with Vince Vaughn. And Michael Kennedy is gay, and he was saying he was talking about a gay character he wrote in the story, and he was saying that that's kind of the problem with gay characters right now is that they're not allowed to be like bad guys, or they're not allowed to be complicated. And so I think that there's this sort of like and obviously, I can't speak to that, but I can speak to, well, I'm a human, and we all can agree we all are complicated, but certainly, my thing is certainly from a female perspective. But yeah, I think that if we can sort of stretch those boundaries, it's so fun to have villains of all types. our protagonist who really steps in it and makes a huge mistake. I remember my first book, I had my protagonist kind of have like this moment where she's really bratty, and somebody pointed it out, and they were like, wow, she's like really, this is like really brat behavior here. I don't like this. And I was like, yeah, like, I know, like, I'm not going to take it out. Like, she's acting like not okay right there. So I think that's kind of what I like to play with, and kind of put people in these horrible situations and see if they sink or swim. And that's what's great about horror.
Yeah, and we all have our flaws in real life, so it doesn't make sense that a character, and we all make fools of ourselves, we all do dumb shit or stuff that we regret doing, and it doesn't make us. It actually makes us more human. It doesn't make us any less relatable, and it works the same way for characters. And I feel like that's a big disservice, like you said. I mean, it's been done. I mean, I brought it up, I guess, but like you suggested, it's a disservice if the characters can't be complicated, or like Michael Kennedy said, right? Is it? He said, if a gay character can't be a villain, I mean, it becomes a problem if they're a villain because they are their identity, but it doesn't. But it shouldn't disqualify you from being anything.
I know, right? Exactly. But that's what's fun about being a writer, is being able to push my agenda, which is complicated female heroines in horror. So yeah.
Hey, I can get behind that. That's a good one. I'll have your back in the battles to come.
Thank you.
We're on the same side there. But anyway, So Meg, tell people where they can find your work, and because we're about out of time.
So you can go to meghafdahl.com. My last name is spelled Hafdahl. You can also follow me on Twitter at Meg Hafdahl, Instagram. I have a Facebook author page. You can also go to horrorrewind.com. That's my podcast I do with my co-author and my best friend. We just talk about horror movies. And you can pretty much find me anywhere and everywhere. So I'd love to hear from people. And, I want to hear if you read Science of Monsters, Tim.
Oh, wow. I'm going to have to check it out. Thank you for reminding me. So, Meg, thanks so much. It's been awesome. Yeah. And as for this podcast, you can find us at mentalcellarpublications.com. That sounds like I should be a horror writer. I need to change it.
Yeah.
It's because my mind is a basement. It's brutal. But I wouldn't necessarily say a torture dungeon, but it's not nice.
Well, I get
it. But anyway, you can also find my books on timniederwriter.com/books. Thanks for listening, everybody. And I will talk to you next week. Stay safe out there and don't get murdered. I'm serious. I'll know if you are. All right. Take it easy, everybody. Bye-bye.
That tears it.